The next speaker is from LG Energy Solution. We have Mr. Seunghwan to talk about LG Energy Solutions' response to the EU battery regulation and its circular economy transition strategy. Good afternoon. My name is Seunghwan from LG Energy Solution.
순환성 관련된 요구사항.
So I want to talk about
순환 경제.
I want to talk about the EU battery regulation and our response to that requirement. So my presentation will cover the first company introduction and the circularity requirements in EU and challenges and suggestions. Because we don't have time, I will skip the company introduction, move straight over to the circularity requirements. EU battery regulation is unique because this is an act that deals with a specific product, a specific battery product. So I thought this was a unique and new challenge.
특히 그 내용 중에
Because if you look at the details, there's a mention of carbon footprint, recycled contents, and removability and replaceability. All of these new requirements, that is very new. So we had a lot of challenges to prepare for this upcoming regulation.
네, 처음에 아까
Mr. Anri covered most of it in the beginning, so I will skip some of these parts. Let me just briefly summarize it. So all the LNT battery and their different timeline for the declaration, class, and threshold, and the regulation will be applied in according to that. This is a draft label, so this shows the carbon footprint, and this is a class A, B, C, D, E. A is the best and E is the lowest. It's a grade for the batteries, and if you are a E-class battery, it is not eligible for sale in the EU market, for example. But this is a draft, so it's subject to change. So printing in color and attaching this to each of the batteries, is it environmental or is it sustainable? So these kind of discussions take place. And in the 24, it should be applied, but however, there's a slight delay. So after 1 year, it will be implemented. So I think each product will have a little bit of delayed schedule. So when I was responding to this regulation, these are the challenges that we felt, because carbon footprint is not just about disclosing. It has to be verified by a third party. And this verification by third party has to be in the noble list, and it has to be 1 year after that. The regulation announcement and noble list update has a different timeline, so if there is a gap. So I calculated my carbon footprint, but it's not verified, so I cannot disclose it. There could be some of the challenges due to delayed or difference of the timeline. And when this regulation was first announced in May 2024 about electricity modeling, how do we decide how to decide how to calculate the electricity modeling was in the package. However, the average electricity output factor was to be used in the beginning, and for renewable energy, whether it is only the renewable energy that is directly connected to the electricity grid will be calculated in the electricity modeling. So many companies and countries oppose this because, for example, coal-fired plants, if the company is located in a country with a lot of carbon powered electricity, they have to use coal-fired power plant electricity, because the companies do not have any discretion in choosing the energy resource. So there's a lot of opposition. And for third-party verification, if I make a same sell, I sell to different clients. If different clients have their own different third party to verify, so with the same product, I would have to get it verified by 4 different third-party companies. So this was going to cause a lot of burden for the manufacturer. And next is recycled contents in EV battery. Cobalt, nickel, and lithium of recycled materials has to be documented. First, you have to disclose what you are using now, and there's the first minimum target and the second minimum target from 2036. You have to comply with the second target, which is going to be more strict, and at the end of 2028, we have to the EC will review whether these targets are suitable or not. However, but in the process, our concern is because the first target takes place in 2031, but this number, if the batteries that we sell now, when it is returned, how much can we receive from these used batteries, and how much we make in 2031? But if you look at the market condition, we have a lot of things taking place that we didn't expect. For example, EV demand is declining, some say, and also because many people use EVs and battery life of the EV was much longer than we expected. People said in the beginning, 8 years is the life cycle, expected life cycle of the battery for EVs, but it was actually much longer than that. So if we compare all that, in 2031, we could retrieve much less than we expect now. But if we do not receive as much as we expected, then we will have to pay additionally to procure used batteries. So how do we reconcile that? How that will be changed by that time, I think, is our concern. And for this to go on very well, so we have to have a verification or validation from where this used battery comes from. Well, electricity comes from both coal-fired power plants and nuclear power plants and renewable power plants. But we do not know, there's no way to discern, but electricity coming from PV has certification. So we know how much is coming from PV, but it is not possible to know that whether how much is coming from nuclear or coal-fired power plants. So it is not easy to learn about that for used batteries as well. Think about the packs. Think of a laptop or the battery packs in the cell phone. Consumers can remove it and replace it with a new one. Think about the old cell phones when we used a few years ago. I think this is possible. If we update the design, I think we will be able to replace and remove the batteries in the EV. But for LMT, it's not easy, because this is a light means of transport. It's a small cylinder batteries. We have to design in a manner that the independent person can remove and install the new one. Who are those independent people? The independent professional, who is the kind of person? What kind of credentials does that person have? We do not have much information about those credentials. So to change the design so that an independent person that we don't have no information about can replace it, that's not easy. And there's a grandfathering. To replace, we need some parts, we need new cells. After 5 years, the regulation says we have to supply after 5 years that we sell this product. For example, if a bicycle will be produced in 2027, we can do that grandfathering. Look at the second category. Transportation modes that are being manufactured in 25 now or manufactured last year and still will be sold in 2027, we have to change the design to meet this regulation. And changing the design is actually making a new product for us. So it'll also be a challenge. And maybe if you sell it in 23 and it reached 27, you still have to prepare the spare parts to be replaced in 27. So if we go into detail, this is very complex. So because LG Energy Solution has to prepare to satisfy all these regulations, it's a very complex process. And next is about the due diligence. So I will briefly go over due diligence because it was already touched upon. We have to have a full picture of the supplied raw materials, whether those raw materials have any issues. We have to have a system to verify, and the information has to be disclosed. That information has to be verified as well. For example, cobalt, nickel, and lithium manganese are the minimum raw material that has to be mandatorily disclosed to the public. That was supposed to begin in August 2025, but in the new package that is a little bit delayed, and the scope of waiver was only for these small companies. Now SMEs are subject to this waiver, and the frequency of this reporting had been a little bit relaxed, so that's easier for us than before. The biggest concern we have about this is this risk management platform. To establish that kind of platform, we have to have the name and address of the suppliers that supplied raw materials. But for us, it's a business confidentiality, that kind of information. And disclose that kind of information to the public, I think, creates more concerns for us. And this due diligence, we have very similar requirements in CSDDD and CSRD because we have to prepare for the battery regulation of the EU, but also respond to CSDDD and CSRD at the same time. I want these requirements to be aligned in the future to minimize overlapping of these efforts. And this is a table for waste battery management. So there's first EPR. The manufacturer sells, and that does not end there. The manufacturer, after selling, has to have the responsibility for it to be reused and recycled. Not up to the very end of reuse and recycle, but the manufacturer has to prevent from that used batteries from being going to normal, like a garbage disposal utilities. The manufacturer has to make sure that it is up for recycling and reusing. And for portable LMT, EV, and SLI, for industry batteries, for EVs to industry batteries, there's no collection target. Basically, reuse and recycle everything. However, we don't have the target because EVs, many people sell their used cars. It could go outside of EU market. I think that's why maybe there is no specific target for EV. These used batteries have to have this recycle efficiency. More than 65% of the total weight has to be recycled. It goes up to 70% by 2030. And out of those 65%, cobalt, lead, lithium has to be mostly recovered. And lastly, after recovering these materials, it has to be recycled. And this is a target number for that, so it has a circularity to it. Lastly, this was about the battery passport. Mr. Thomas mentioned a lot about the battery passport, so I am going to explain once again. This is encompassing all of the value chain. You collect the data from different organizations, and it is to be exchanged among stakeholders. I was listening to the previous presentations and I learned something new that I didn't understand before. If I knew them, I would have prepared this presentation differently. The question that we had was about if we collect this data and we have to disclose it to the public who scans the QR. But how do we discern the person scanning the QR code? Will each individual have an ID code? Or how do we understand who is going to scan our QR code? And second concern was about the static data and the dynamic data. So, static data means the data does not change, and dynamic data is something that we have to update. For example, the capacity of the data, what kind of event is the event history, and how long this battery was exposed to extreme heat. That kind of information is dynamic data. But in most cases, the person who knows about the history of the battery is not us. After we install this battery and sells the EV to a consumer, the battery pack itself doesn't have communication tools, so we do not have that information right away. So do we have to contact the person who owns the EV to receive this kind of data? And how do we implement it? We had a lot of questions about this data collection. And this is our LG Energy Solutions response. Even before this regulation was announced, we conducted life cycle assessment LCA to evaluate the environmental impact of our product. So we were disclosing this information. Carbon footprint was one of those information. So we provided to the customers who needed them. And also, we were a member of the Korean efforts to. Next, we move on to. This is about circular battery ecosystem. Even before battery regulation was announced, reusing and recycling is a new business sector that we can tap. So we were looking at the economic aspect of it. And because of the EU regulation, we wanted to prepare for this in a more phased manner. So in the short term, in Europe and in US, we are partnering with local companies to collect use data and do the pre-treatment. And in the mid to long term, we hope to have this perfect closed loop, have a circularity to recycle metal, return to using them to make a new product. That's our mid to long term goal. In detail, so in a local market, we will work with collection networks to secure feedstock. Our LG Energy Solutions and partner scrap will be the feedstock that could cover the major regions, and that metal will be pre-processed and it will be going through the post-processing and PCAM and cell production in the end. For due diligence of the supply chain, we had responsible mineral procurement, and we had a supplier verification strategy. So we are going to share the requirements to the suppliers. And for tier 1 suppliers, we are going to evaluate them according to our metrics and targets, and we will perform due diligence when needed. And for tier 2 suppliers, we are going to guide the tier 1 companies to monitor tier 2. And for tier 3 suppliers, we are going to validate them through certifications. Lastly, this is about battery passport. We were working on implementing this battery passport. The data scope is so wide, and this data is scattered around. It's very fragmented all over our organization. So collecting them was the most difficult part of it. Who has this? Who owns this data? And who can secure this data? Who can procure them? It was the challenge that we are faced with because we're running out of time. I will move fast. So in the process, in the beginning, because we didn't know where to start, were involved in the battery passport pilot for GBA. So we calculated the human rights and the carbon emission. And in the second pilot project, we were more deeply involved along with our suppliers and based on experience. Lastly, and challenges and suggestions. To work on this compliance, we saw a lot of burdens for the suppliers, and to do that, because a lot of areas require third-party verification, and those verifications are overlapping in many aspects. So we wanted to have a more harmonized process, simplified process, because the standards are not in place yet. So interpreting those regulations and instructions differ. Therefore, there was a lot of misunderstanding, trial and error. We had felt that there were a lot of loss or the waste of resources in the process. And so we hope to have a more simplified procedures and easier approach. And for battery passports, because we had our own approach, another customer has their different approach, and there's a lot of requirements that's very different. So I think it will be more efficient to have a more integrated framework that all of us can follow. And lastly, it's about confidentiality. Of course, the mandatory data that is required by this regulation has to be disclosed. However, if that information is very sensitive and it is subject to potential legal disputes, I think disclosing them despite these difficulties will be difficult for us. So I hope to have some changes in that. Thank you so much for sharing the insights and actual experience in responding to this new EU regulation. Thank you for sharing that.